Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am Roberta, and today I have Robert Kennedy III, who is a keynote speaker, a workshop communications trainer, and he's here to share with us how to get started on the speaking trail, and more than anything, how to overcome imposter syndrome, which is one thing that I've struggled with myself. So before I go any further, help me welcome Robert. Hi, Robert.
Hi, how you doing? Hold on, let me do something. I always do this when I go on shows. You ready? Here we go. I bring it. Yeah. All right. Excellent.
I like that. Keep it going.
Yeah. How you doing, Roberta?
I'm doing good. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So tell us more about yourself. I know I didn't cover
Wow.
everything.
That is a big question about myself. I mean, I'm moving up in life. I'm about to enter my third quarter in just a few months right here. So
Oh, you look much younger than that. I know we're an audio.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people can see.
Yeah, well, no, listen. The life is good. I've had a really good life. I can't complain. And so I'm married. My wife and I have had the pleasure. She's been able to stand me for almost 22 years. So 22 years in August.
We love
I've got
stories like that. People don't stay married that long anymore.
yeah. I've got 3 kids. My first child is in college, her freshman year of college this year, and then I've got 2 boys behind her that are high school. One is in high school, and one is graduating from middle school this year, 8th grade. And so that alone keeps me busy because they're busy. They're involved in sports, they're involved in school clubs, they're involved in all sorts of things. And so I'm always hopping for that. But the other side of things is my business, and so I've been in the speaking industry officially, I would say, for the last 6 years. And prior to that, I had a web development, not a web development, I'm sorry. That was prior to that. I've had 4 businesses. Before that, I was in the e-learning industry. And so I was building courses, building online courses for organizations. And what started to happen was after a while, people said, can you not just build the course? Can you teach us how to do it? And so I ended
Wow.
up starting to do training on how to build online courses. And what I ultimately discovered was that I wasn't just telling them, hey, click this button. What I was sharing with them was how to communicate information in a palatable way to their teams, to their employees, to their organization, so that it wasn't just assets that's sitting on a shelf somewhere, right? That's
Which
inside
is
their
what
Google
we
Drive or
discuss on
whatever.
this show. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of how I began to make the transition into the speaking industry through starting to train people about how to develop courses.
Do you still run your courses? Because the online space, especially since the pandemic, there's been a lot more of these online
Yeah.
courses because a lot of things moved online. Do you still make those?
Well, I do them for myself at this point. I haven't been in the space anymore where we develop courses for other organizations. I actually closed that company several years ago. But
Okay.
we know that the online course space is crucial. And as a matter of fact, we have on one side of our business online courses that we offer to small business owners, because we believe that if you've got a business, if you've got a service, if you've got something to offer the world, then one of the things that you can do with that, or one of the ways to share that information, is through speaking, right? And so
Mhm.
how do you share um words, or how do you share or solve problems? That's what I want to say. How do you solve problems in a way that really connects with people and allows them to know that you understand the experience they're having and the journey that they're going through?
Right. This is how somebody explained it to me, that speaking, you can be the brand, you
Mhm.
speak, but the expertise that you deliver to people is the actual service sometimes.
Yes.
You can turn speaking
Yes.
into a career all by itself, but
Mhm.
more so you can be the brand that speaks, and that's how people remember you. But then there's something else that you deliver to them. You solve their problem, just as you said.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are, and I think there are a lot of examples of that in the world. If you know the name Warren Buffett, Warren
Yes.
Buffett he's probably down the list right now, but several years ago, he was about the second or third richest man in the world. He may be
Mhm.
like number 5 or 6 right now. But he was doing a talk at Stanford University. And one of the things that he said was, if you want to increase in your career, if you want to up level your career, the best skill that you can take on is the skill of public speaking. That's going to increase the value of what you bring to the world by 150%. Right. And so he said, listen, if you're willing to take that on right now, I'll pay you to do it.
Oh,
I will contribute to helping you do that, because when he was in college, he was offered the opportunity to take a Dale Carnegie public speaking course, and he took it down. He turned it down. Right. He's like, I don't have time for this, et cetera, et cetera. Um, it came up again, and he paid the money. He paid the $100 fee to take the course, but
yeah.
then he got nervous and he thought that he couldn't do it. So then he didn't do it. But then he started to notice, like in college, all of the people that got opportunities, all of the people that were listened to, all of the people that were in certain positions were people who decided that they were going to speak. The people who were withdrawn and quiet, nobody ever came and said, "Hey, Robert, would you mind doing this? Or can you share with us? Can you speak? Can you do?" No, because they were withdrawn and quiet, and people didn't typically ask their opinions. And so they were not chosen, or they were not, recognized to move
Mm.
things in a certain way as leaders. And so he said, listen, you if you want to have a career where you have upward mobility, communication, public speaking is the best skill that you can learn. So he ultimately, after that, somebody held him accountable, and he took the Dale Carnegie course, and he said that was the best $100 that he spent in his entire career, more than anything else. And this guy's a billionaire, right? But that's the
Wow.
best
If
money that
Warren
he's ever
Buffett
spent.
says it, who are we to argue?
Yeah.
That for me, my first job in 1995 was a huge eye opener, because I
Mhm.
worked for an engineering company, that society deems as, oh, they're socially awkward, they're quiet, all their brilliance lies on the hard drives.
Yeah.
And it was huge for me to discover that the most brilliant person is not necessarily the one that's promoted.
Right.
Leadership positions are taken by those who speak up, because that's less of the actual day-to-day task that you
Hmm.
partake in. What happens is you manage people, and managing people means speaking, having interpersonal skills, and being able to manage conflict, and
Yeah.
all the things that you didn't necessarily study for in college when you're studying for your engineering degree.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
those are the people who climb the ladder.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with my wife several months ago, and we were talking about someone. I guess she was having a conversation with a friend of hers, and they were talking about how to move up the ladder and why they were struggling, why they were struggling with this. And my wife was sharing this with me, and my response was, "Listen, based on what I've seen or what I've observed, part of what happens is there's a language of leadership. There's a way that leaders speak that is different than most other people. Leaders tend to speak strategically.
Mm,
Leaders tend to speak big picture. They look at they look at the idea on the front of the puzzle box. They're
right.
not so much focused on how many puzzle pieces, which is a corner piece or which is a side piece. They're looking at the picture on the front of the box, and that's how they speak. Other people who are, if you find yourself stuck at the lower levels of a corporate ladder, start looking at your language, because if you're speaking about task, if your language is task oriented, right? If you're speaking about the day-to-day things, then you want to start thinking about, okay, let me start looking at the overall picture. Let me start speaking about what's happening quarterly and yearly and over a 5-year period, rather than what is the list of 10 tasks that we need to do today.
Because that's more the long-term vision, if you think
Mhm.
bigger than just your day-to-day.
Right. And vision is a critical word, because people follow vision. If you execute a vision, people say, "Oh my gosh, yes, I see that within myself. I see that as a possibility." Right? We think about people in the United States. We think about Martin Luther King. What is Martin Luther King known for? He's made many speeches, but the
But
speech
I
that
have
people
a
associate
dream,
exactly,
the vision.
exactly. People follow behind a vision. A vision is inspirational and aspirational for people. So, as a leader or somebody who wants to be in a leadership position, start thinking about how you can speak in vision language, in dream language, in aspirational and inspirational language. Push people to go higher, even with the words that you speak.
Because that's how you lead.
Yeah,
That's when you lead, you actually chart new territory for people to follow.
yeah,
That automatically makes you a leader.
right,
So yes, you cannot just be narrow focused on, oh yes, we need to accomplish this today and that's it.
right.
Mm. What can you say to people who feel like they have imposter syndrome? They feel like, oh, I'm not ready to take on that. That sounds like big shoes to me.
Yeah, I remember reading a story several years back about Michael Jackson. And Michael Jackson is known to many of us as the greatest performer, the king of pop. I mean, known internationally, not just in a state, not just in the
In
United States,
history.
but internationally as the greatest performer, the greatest entertainer of all time, right?
Hmm.
And the thing that I found interesting in the story was that Michael Jackson suffered terribly from what we think of as imposter syndrome. As a matter of fact, there were times where he didn't go out on stage and he threw up backstage because he had
Oh,
what he called, yeah, yeah. And so it's kind of like when he got on stage, it was the new world. Once he got the courage to get out there, it was like a totally different space for him, and he just entered this new realm, right? But the journey to get out on stage was a frightening one for him, and several other performers. A lot of other people say that Barbara Streisand
I cannot
suffered
fathom.
terribly. Yeah, yeah, suffered terribly from stage fright. Beyonce, if you think about Beyonce, Beyonce says that when she gets out on stage, she actually has created another persona for herself,
Sasha Fierce.
Sasha Fierce.
Mm.
Yes, because she doesn't believe that Beyonce is worthy, or she's scared. She's got this. She's nervous about being out there. So the way that she coped, or the way that she dealt with that, was by creating this alter ego or this persona that didn't have to buy into imposter syndrome and the fears that Beyonce had to deal with. Right.
That
And
amazes
so
me.
this is not something that the lowest of us or the weakest of us or the least talented of us experience. This is
Mm.
something that so many people in leadership positions. So here's the thing that I want to share with, but I think it's one of the great things about humanity is when we see that our experiences are shared, when we see that the thing that I'm feeling is not so much different than other people, then it, for some reason, it gives us just a little bit more courage, right? So if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, I want to encourage you to go check out books and biographies and find out the stories and the intimate feelings and the experiences that people who were world leaders or great performers, go find out what was happening, how they were feeling, because
Mm.
they weren't feeling that much different than you.
True. I find that, yes, biographies, they are huge eye openers because that's not the stuff you hear in the news. You
Right.
only hear about the successes and the great things they've done. You don't
Yeah.
hear the journey, the vulnerable stages they went through when they were scared,
Yeah.
when things were tough, when they broke down, when they were ready to give up a million times before
Yeah.
they got to the parts that we know about them, the greatest parts that we know about them. So
Right.
yes, that's true. That certainly helps. When you read people's biographies and the stories, you'd be amazed
Yeah.
that they're no
Yeah.
different than us. So just get started. Is there anything that you felt in your life you you never thought you'd be good at, and you had imposter syndrome and you thought, no, I'm not going to do this, and you surprised yourself when you decided to take action and start doing it?
I would say it's probably what I'm doing now. I remember I have what I call a signature story that I share, and when I'm speaking with organizations or I'm speaking with people, I tell them that when I was young, I was probably about 2 years old, and my parents left us with in the islands we call them helpers, right?
Mm.
They're like nannies or people that are around,
Oh
babysitters,
yes,
etc.
back home as well, we say helpers. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, I'm home with the helpers, and I always heard, and when I was, they called me Bobby when I was a kid. They're like, Bobby, you talk too much. Bobby, you talk too much. Bobby, you ask too many questions. Bobby, you're so inquisitive. You ask too many questions. You should be a lawyer. You talk too much. And I kept hearing that, and I shut down. So as a child, after that time, I was known as a shy, withdrawn, would rather be in my room playing with trains than being out at the party type of child. I had a small group of friends, of course, but I was withdrawn. I was, a shy child. And as I think back on the story, I I recognized that my voice was taken from me. I
Mm,
realized that my voice was suppressed, was squished, and so point number one is, as adults, be very careful about what you pour into children at a
children.
young, impressionable age, because you do not know how they're perceiving, right? And I mean, I think about this. I tell you that I'm just about to hit my third quarter. I'll be 50 in a few months, right?
Mm.
But I remember clearly, vividly, these moments in my life at the age of 2.
Because that's how they made you feel. Anything
Right.
that makes us feel a certain way, those
Yeah.
impressions never leave. And more than
Yeah.
anything, we, even as adults, not just children, the people closest to us, we always seek for their validation and a
Mhm.
sense of belonging with them. And that's why instead of you fighting back and say, hey, I want to speak up, you actually
Right.
shut down because you want to be part of this tribe of
Yeah.
people that are closest to you. That's, yeah, we
Yeah.
need to be very careful.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, I think as humans, I think if we go back to even the imposter syndrome conversation, as human beings, we we try to avoid hurt or pain as much as possible. And so
Mm.
we develop coping mechanisms in our lives to try to eliminate hurt. Or let me not even say that we try to eliminate hurt. We try to eliminate more hurt than we're currently having.
Right.
Right? So there's
True.
some people where you're like, you look at them, you're like, wait, you're in a painful situation. Why would you stay in that situation? Because to change for them, they perceive that as hurting more
So
than the
this
hurt that
is
they're
the
currently
one that
having.
they think is better
Right. Right. I'll
comparatively.
choose
Mm.
I'll choose this pain. I'll choose this pain
The
because
devil I
I
know.
I know what this feels like. I
Yeah.
don't I don't want new pain.
Mm.
Right?
Devil
That
I
might
know.
hurt more. Right. So we try to avoid that, and I think one of the biggest tricks and the traps that we run into is feeling like we are the only ones that are experiencing that hurt or that pain.
Which
And
is
when we
usually what we tell ourselves.
right, right, right. But then when we recognize that other people have experienced it and they live through it and they're successful in spite of it, or maybe because of it, we think differently. And that's the reason why motivation, that's the reason why inspiration works,
Mm.
because we see that other people were able to navigate pain as well.
That and also with us, I'm 46, not
Mhm.
too not too much younger than you. Looking back in my 20s, I used to think when things go wrong, the world is gonna end.
Right.
But now looking back, what I've lived through, I thought, oh, well, I know it's gonna be okay
Yeah.
eventually. So
Yeah.
looking back, not just the other people, but my life lessons, I thought, yeah, I've lived through
Yeah.
that. Oh yeah, I can push through this.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah. It's
wisdom
kind
that
of like
comes with age. Yeah.
it's kind of like the in the summer you go to the pool or you go to the beach. right? And you walk towards the beach, and the first moment that you put your foot in the water, you're like, oh, it's cold, right? But then you get in and you stay there for a little bit, and you realize, wait a minute, I can deal with this.
Mm.
It's not as cold as I thought it was when I first stepped in it, right? And so we've got to consistently remember, and this is why I like storytelling, right? Because if we remind ourselves of the stories of success, we remind ourselves of the moments where we perceived or thought something, and then when we actually did it or when we got involved in it, what we perceived wasn't actually the truth, then we begin to gain a little bit of courage. And so that's why it's important to remind ourselves of our and celebrate
Mm.
the important moments, or even the little moments in our life.
Yes, we have so many horrors. I've begun to laugh at
Yeah.
when I heard a horror story thinking something was a certain way and looking back and realizing I was so way off. Like,
Yeah.
Roberta, how ridiculous were you to think that? Because yes, we have the stories in our heads are way horrific than the reality in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah. I forgot who made this statement, but they said worry is an active misuse of imagination.
Amen. That is so true.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is so
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, our imaginations were built for creativity, to make amazing things, to think about things that were previously impossible, or things that can just make the world this fantastic um fantasy, if you want to call it that,
Mm.
that's just this fantastic place. And so when we take our imagination and we create fears, or we buy into fears that have not happened, right?
That probably never will.
Exactly.
Speaking
Exactly.
of imagination, I mean, think about it. I'm sitting here with you, we're on a Zoom call.
Mhm.
Somebody imagined that back in the 90s, it didn't exist.
Somebody imagined it earlier than the 50s, because if you remember when I was a kid, you remember, I don't know if you remember the cartoon, The Jetsons.
Um, I
Right.
heard about it. I
Okay.
don't think in South
So
Africa they bought that. They used to just buy the most popular shows from the States.
okay, so as a kid, there was this show, there was this cartoon, The Jetsons, and
Mm.
in The Jetsons, this is like the 80s, right? So but by the time I watching it in the 80s, it had been a cartoon that was created maybe like in the early 70s at this point. But in this cartoon, they had this future family. They had flying cars. They had sidewalks that moved automatically. You just kind of stand on it, and it moves. They had instead of phones, they had video screens in the wall. That's how you would talk to people. They had robots that clean the house, right? So they had all of these different things, and here we are in 2022. And I'm like, wait a minute. I can talk to Roberta over Zoom. Wait a minute. I can speak to my mom over FaceTime. Wait a minute.
There's
If I
Roomba
go,
cleaning our homes when we land.
there's Roomba cleaning our house. Yep. Wait a minute. If I go to the airport, I don't have to walk all the way to my concourse. There's this sidewalk that just kind of moves me along if I choose, right? The only thing in there that isn't really commercial yet is the flying cars. Although we do have flying cars.
We have self-driving ones as it is.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So somebody close to half a century ago was imagining this stuff, right?
Meanwhile, we're
And
living half of it already, even more than half.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It was a long time, and people, so people are imagining things. I mean, it, our everything that we do in our day is the result of somebody's active imagination.
So what can we do instead of using it and wasting it on worry? How do we
Mhm.
switch and make it a habit to actually
Wow,
imagine creative things? Because we live
wow.
on autopilot, just like you had someone tell you to be quiet and you ended up being
Mhm.
shy, we've also had things being put in us
Right,
that suppressed our imaginations in ways we
right.
could have optimized it. What's one thing that you think we can do in order to shift that?
Well, James Altucher has this great book called Choose Yourself. And inside of that book, he talks about how he developed this habit of writing down 10 ideas daily, right? Because the brain and the creative part of your brain, it's like a muscle, right? If the more that you use it, the stronger it becomes, the greater the greater it can dig, the deeper it can dig, right? And so he said, I write down 10 ideas daily. And he said, you know what? The majority of them are probably silly, crazy, spaced out, stupid ideas that I will never come back to and use. But every so often, there is one or two that I'm like, I can probably do something with that, right? And I can share it with somebody, or I can ask somebody to help me do it or help me build it, right? So there are 2 points inside of that. Number one is practicing the art of ideating, right? Creating a habit out of just coming up with ideas. I literally have I have Evernote as one of the tools that I use to write down a lot of different things. And I've got a folder in it that just says ideas. And sometimes I think of stuff and I just write it down in there. And sometimes I'll go back to it and I'll see, oh my gosh, I wrote this thing down 6 years ago and now I'm doing it.
Wow.
Right?
Like you call yourself an ideator. That was the first time I heard that word.
Really? Oh yeah. Yeah.
Ideator.
So
usually people just say I'm a creator. Ideator. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so there's two different, so those are two different things, right? So the creators are the ones who you're actually executing, you're actually doing it, you're bringing an idea to life. An ideator or ideation is just the process of sitting in your space, sitting in your awareness and creating ideas. You may or may not do anything with those ideas, but it's just allowing those ideas to come to life and giving yourself or giving your ideas permission to be. Right? Because a lot of times, and here's what happens in our lives, right? We're kids, and all of us have had this experience. You're a kid. You're in elementary school in South Africa. In Jamaica, you call it primary school, right? So
my generation called it primary school. Suddenly, it's elementary now.
Right. So in primary school, in the lower grades, one of the first activities that they teach you how to do is to color. Right? So you've got coloring books and you're coloring inside these coloring books. And here's where they start to kind of suppress our creativity. They tell us to color in the coloring books, but then you start to color and they say, wait a minute, no, you have to color inside the lines.
Inside the box.
You gotta color inside. So if you're coloring, there's a picture of a rabbit and you gotta color the picture of the rabbit. No, you can't color outside.
Then you get an F.
You gotta color inside the rabbit. Hold on, that's a tree. No, you have to color it green. Oh no, trees are green and the bottom part of the tree is brown. So you have to color it green and brown. And before you know it, you got a whole class of green and brown trees.
Everybody's thing looks the same.
Right. But what about the child who's just like, listen, I want to use purple on my tree.
Do you actually know in spring in South Africa, we have what they call jacaranda trees. So in the spring, they actually have purple flowers and they just fill up the whole neighborhood.
Right.
So the kid would have thought purple, that was actually real.
Exactly. They
were not allowed to say green.
Exactly. So we try to mold, and I'll use a controversial word. We try to brainwash kids from a very early age and condition them to do certain things, and then they get grown up and we wonder why they're not creative.
And we wonder why adults are sheep who just want to be like everybody else instead of standing out and being different.
Right.
It's different if you realize it's actually scary and lonely and everybody thinks, oh no, I don't want to be here, because then you get the spotlight, you're different.
Right. We crush them. We tell them it's got to be this way. And then when they get into corporate, we tell them, you got to think outside of the box. What? You told me not to.
That's a new idea. That's new.
Yeah. So it's, we've got to rethink our education in some ways. And when I say education, I'm not just talking about the school or the school building. I'm talking about how we train our children, how we train ourselves, from a very early age and really get back to embracing, allowing, and empowering creativity. Because if we do that, that really allows for a better world, I think.
Definitely,
Yeah,
definitely. Because there's so much creative juice running through everybody's DNA that
yeah,
the fact that we're not witnessing all of it, it's suppressed somewhere. We
mhm,
need to create an environment where we bring that out. So when it
yeah,
comes to leadership, which we touched on earlier,
yeah.
do you think that it's something that people can cultivate, or as they used to say, are leaders born and made, or some people are just born with it?
I don't believe that leaders are just born. And I'm going to caveat that in a couple of ways. Number one is that my family leadership is something that I heard since I was a child. My dad is one of 10 children. My mom is one of 8 children. So our
Big family.
family is pretty big, but leadership and I guess being one of 10, each child is jostling for position, and they kind of have to find their way inside of that. So my dad's side especially, all of them, all 10 of them, just strong-minded, highly opinionated people, right? And so maybe somewhere in my genetics there is the the decision or the willingness or the predisposition to to speak out in some way,
Mm,
right? To have to let my opinion be heard in some way. Maybe some of that is there. But at some point in our lives, in everybody's lives, there is the opportunity for us to lead in some way. Parents have the opportunity to lead automatically, right? Whether they take that on or not, that's a different story. Parents have the ability to lead. We have the ability to lead in our friendship relationships. We got to make a decision about which restaurant to go to eat for lunch. We have the ability to lead there. There's the ability to lead when there is friends or peer pressure. Friends may be making a wrong decision. We've
mhm.
got the ability to lead. We've got the ability to lead in work and in church. There's so many different leadership opportunities in our lives. And so it's not about being born, it's about being willing to embrace what it is. And we start that by leading ourselves and giving ourselves permission to say yes to ourselves, permission to think, to see that the ideas that we've come up with or the things that we want to do are okay,
Right.
right? And then when we begin to give ourselves permission, then we can begin to choose to lead others as well.
To bring out that leader in us. And it's
Yes,
not about
absolutely.
position as well,
No,
because usually
no.
we're associated with, oh, unless I'm president or CEO, then I'm not a leader.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes leadership is not about being in front. It just may be the being courageous enough to choose to do something before anybody else, whether or not
Mm,
people follow you. Right. So I hear some people say, well, if you want to know if you're a leader, turn around and see if there are people following. Sometimes people don't follow, at least not immediately. Right. But if
big
you're
one.
courageous
Yeah.
enough to do something first, sometimes it's years later, sometimes it's decades later. But if you do something and you're courageous enough to do it first, people look and they're saying, oh, okay, yeah, yeah, Roberta was the first person to do that. Let me see if I can do it as well.
Mm. Sometimes it's, if you believe in it so much, they first buy into the belief. They may not fully understand or
Right.
buy into the thing, the idea itself, but
Mhm.
just seeing your belief in it and your convictions about it, they
That's
may
right.
eventually start to follow and say, hey, she's really serious about this. Let me see what's in there.
Yeah. Exactly.
Why
Exactly.
do you think that, especially in our community, why do you think that public speaking as a career is not sold so much?
Well, I think there are, first of all, traditional careers. When I was a kid, uh, being a doctor was acceptable, being a teacher was acceptable, being a pastor, because my dad was a pastor, was acceptable. Being a lawyer, nah.
Really? That's what every
Yeah.
parent pushes because it pays well.
Well, so when I was a kid, a lot of people thought that lawyers were unethical. They said lawyers are liars, right? And so my family was like, yeah, I don't know if we want you to be in the law and go to law school or be a lawyer, right? Because
Especially
sometimes,
after being told you speak so much, you need to be a lawyer.
right, exactly. Well, so here was the misconception. People thought that lawyers only defended criminals.
Ah, I see. That's
Right.
why lawyers are
So,
liars to them.
right. So they did not understand the breadth of the legal profession. And so that's
Mm.
what happens. People make assumptions based on faulty premises sometimes. I'll tell you a
Or
story
their
real
little
quickly.
knowledge or little
Yeah.
experience.
Do you remember? I don't know if you've heard this story, but there's a story of a lady who would would put meatloaf in the oven and then take it out and give it to her family for dinner. And every time she took it out, she would cut off the ends of the meatloaf, right? And then she would serve it. And so she did that, and she did it for a while. And her daughter asked her, "Why do you do that?" She said, "Well, that's how my mother did it." So they went and asked the mother, and she said, "That's why my mother did it that way." All right. So then they said, okay, well, I do it that way. You do it that way. Let's go ask great grandma. So they went and asked the great grandmother why she cut off the ends of the meatloaf. And she said, well, the pan that I had was too small. And so I had to do that in order to fit it in there.
You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah. So we've got 3 generations of people doing something on
They
assumption.
don't even ask why it was
Right.
done.
Right.
I mean, I'm
Right.
laughing, but I know there's a lot of things I'm probably doing and never even asked why.
Right. 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 And so, we go through life and we operate via certain assumptions. And so back to the question that you asked, why don't more of us think about public speaking as a career path? Well, because a lot of us don't think that we can. We don't think that we can. The heroes that we know of as minorities that spoke up are usually no longer alive. Right? Martin Luther King was a speaker. Malcolm X was a speaker. Marcus Garvey was a speaker, right? And so we think about, Webb Du Bois, James Baldwin, we think about these people that spoke up, and they spoke not because they were trying to make a career, but they spoke because they were fighters, and because they were fighting for a group of people. Yeah, because of it. And a lot of us don't think that we have the strength to do that, because again, we've blocked speaking into kind of like this small space. But there's so much that can be done. There's so many different areas of speaking. You can be a motivational speaker, you can be a technical speaker, you can be a
a
leadership.
trainer, like you said, you used to do training as
Exactly.
well, and that's how you
Exactly. And
got
I still do
started.
training. I still do training. Training is actually, if I were to give you the percentage of my business, training and workshops are the bulk of what I do more than keynote speaking. Right? Because companies don't want just somebody all the time just to amp them up. They want real, practical, transformational principles that they can implement and see change. Right. And so they would rather me spend a day with them, spend 4 hours with them saying, hey, here's the 5-step framework that you can implement today in order to make this change, than going there for 45 minutes to say, you know what, I see you doing this and you can do it too. You can do better. If you adopt certain things, you can make this change. And in 5 years, you'll be amazing. All you got to do is just believe, right? So that, I mean, and that's good. And that has its place. That has its place, but they also want to be able to ask me some questions sometimes to say, hey, Robert, you just said this. How can we do that? Okay, Cool.
So that they internalize the information and actually apply it in practical day-to-day life.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, the majority of what I do is more workshops and training than keynotes.
Right. Robert, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us today. Before we go, we'd like to know where can we find you after this podcast in case you want to have more information or where to get the training.
I'm easy to find. I'm Robert Kennedy 3 on all social media platforms. My website is robertkennedy3.com, the number 3. And you can find me also on Facebook in the Storytellers Growth Lab. You can just go to storytellersgrowthlab.com and click join the community, and you can get connected there as well.
And Robert Kennedy 3, the 3 is in Roman numerals, right?
Nope, the number alphanumeric.
The number alphanumerical 3. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Fantastic. Thank you, Roberta.